the people of the United States, this brand new experiment of a country, to be able to achieve and to put in happiness there, it must mean something. It must mean that they wanted us to be happy. And I think that even more interestingly, they thought that there was actually a role for government and policymakers to create a climate and conditions for people to be happy. And I think that is part of, if not the foundation of the American experiment. And if you think about the data that we look at that measures how countries are doing, how communities are doing, you look at health, you look at education, you look at GDP, employment, income levels. Nowadays, happiness is right up there with the kind of data that we're trying to collect and understand in order to improve our society. I mean, we have a World Happiness Report, which which I definitely recommend, is a very interesting read, which ranks 157 countries according to their happiness levels. We have, Dubai has a Ministry of Happiness. Bhutan, for 20 years, has had a gross national happiness index. This is a real thing. But, I mean, no matter where you live in the world, no matter what kinds of policies you experience, I mean, in our daily lives, we're looking to achieve happiness, and that's really what this conversation is about. The world is different than when our founders crafted the Declaration of Independence, in that we've never been able to access so much information and knowledge so quickly. We've never been able to keep in contact with so many people that we know, and for better or worse, people we don't know. There are so many different ways to connect in real time. And there's a couple of statistics on that front that you should consider. So there are 2.6 billion unique email accounts that exist in the world. And if you think about the number of children that we have and the total population, it basically means that almost everybody on the planet, or at least 2/3 of them, have an email account, so are communicating virtually. The video game industry is a $110 billion industry, and almost half of that revenue is from games on your mobile device. I mean, last year, in 2017, the amount of time spent per day on social networking sites for your average American was 135 minutes. So clearly the way that we actually forge relationships and communicate with each other is changing rapidly. So that's the focus of today's discussion. You know, with the research showing that the strength of human relationships is so critical to achieving happiness, how does the virtual online environment help us reach that level of happiness? Does it give us the same level of happiness as personal connections? Are the benefits similar or different? And how can technology advancements over the course of the next decade can shift this dynamic even more? So with that, I'm going to turn it over to the real experts in this area from two very different points of view, but who are going to have an interesting conversation on this. So Dr. Robert Waldinger is a professor of psychiatry at Harvard Medical School and directs Harvard's 75-year-long study of adult life. This is the longest longitudinal study of adult life ever done. So Robert's going to tell us some more about the findings of this remarkable research, and if you'd like, you can also watch his TED Talk, and since we're talking about numbers, it's been viewed over 20 million times. Our other speaker is Anastasia Staten. She's the director of the Entertainment Software Association Foundation, where she actually leverages the power of video games beyond just entertainment. In addition to her experience actually in the gaming industry, Anastasia's worked on important issues such as ridding the world of landmines and worked for the American Humane Society. And I do want to say that originally, as you saw in the agenda, Robin Hunicke was going to be here for the second speaker, but is trapped in an airport somewhere in the Pacific due to weather. And we found this out last night, and Anastasia stepped up to the plate and agreed to join us for this conversation last night. So I'm sure she's exceptionally well prepared. And with that, I welcome you both to the stage. Thank you.
Well, thank you for that introduction. Really appreciate it. And thank you for putting out the disclaimer label that I'm probably the only one with a few talking points, so I don't forget some of the awesome things I want to say. But I would love, if you don't mind, tossing it over to you to kind of start. And I love a little of the conversation we had backstage that, you know, both of us have some areas of expertise, his a little more so than mine. Mine's a little more anecdotal and community-based. But I love that we're both approaching this from just curious individuals. So you don't mind starting?
No, I don't
Awesome.
mind. In fact, I have young adult sons who play video games, and most of the things I do, they're not interested in. But when I said I was going to get to talk to someone who's a real video game expert, they thought this was way cooler than anything else I've done. So I'm really happy to be here. Well, as Josh was saying, I've been the fourth director of this study that's actually now been going for 80 years that followed the same people from the time they were teenagers all the way into their 90s. And what we were trying to understand was not just what makes people happy in the colloquial sense of am I happy right now, but really what contributes to human thriving, what allows people to live lives that they feel are good and meaningful and purposeful. So that includes health and education, and as well as well-being, mood. And the thing that I think got Halcyon to ask me to come here for By the People is our finding that we at first didn't believe. So when we were trying to figure out what predicts who's going to stay happy and healthy as they go through their adult life, we followed their cholesterol levels and did they smoke and did they exercise. But the biggest predictor was how connected they were to other people and how warm their relationships were with other people. It was stronger than their cholesterol levels and their blood pressure. So, and at first we didn't believe it, and then other studies began to find the same thing. And so what we've been studying now is the power of our social connections with each other to keep us happy and healthy.
I think one of the things, if I understand this correctly, that in this whole concept of happiness that we were sort of asked to talk about today is the relationship between quote unquote in-person relationships and connections versus kind of virtual. And you know, I think that as technology has advanced, and there's tons of technology now that is helping individuals connect and facilitate interactions, you're seeing those traditional barriers of what is, and I'm probably going to use quote unquote a lot of times, real relationships. It's kind of breaking those barriers down. And I guess that's how I see it. And I guess I would just kind of, I'm wondering from you, like, is that what you guys are seeing? Like, people aren't necessarily defining, maybe society is still possibly judging in maybe a negative manner online interactions, but are you even seeing people have any difference in between those two?
We don't know yet. So what we're trying to study is what are the active ingredients in relationships? Like, why would relationships make our blood pressure go down? Why would they make us get diabetes less soon, if at all, or, you know, or less heart disease as we grow older? How could that possibly happen? So when we think about the active ingredients, we're studying how relationships help us manage stress, how they help us reduce our negative emotions, anxiety, anger. And what we know is that, for example, if you're in a doctor's office and you're waiting to have a procedure and you're scared about it, having another person there brings your heart rate down. Having a person you know and love there brings your heart rate down further. Being alone keeps your heart rate high. So so what happens then in the virtual world? I bet there are relationships in the virtual world that can help people manage stress and feel better, but we don't know much about it yet.
Yeah, I mean, I think anecdotally, some of the things that I've seen is, you know, I mean, I think we should, for myself, first and foremost, want to say I think that everyone can define happiness differently. I'm sure there's some commonalities that we all can apply a definition to, but it's whatever, it's a feeling that you have, and that regardless of where you get that fulfillment, if it's a positive experience, it contributes to making you happy. And I think video games provide a really interesting and unique opportunity for people to engage. So if you say that, people connecting with other individuals is a positive in building long-term happiness, then I think video games do that. Inherently, whether it's online or offline, video games provide people an opportunity to connect, to experience something together. And then some of those virtual relationships I've seen move offline and into more in-person scenarios with conferences and esports tournaments. And I just think it's really, really interesting to think that we are so sometimes stayed in our definition of what building relationships are, that we're even having this discussion today about what is considered a real relationship and what contributes to our happiness.
Well, but, I mean, maybe I'm stayed, but we just had a conversation here in the last session between a Palestinian and an Israeli. And they were trying really hard to meet each other, right? And to talk about differences. What if they had been on Zoom? You know, what if they had been doing the Hollywood Squares thing where they were each looking at each other on a screen? Is the communication the same? Is the emotional connection the same? And I don't really know. I mean, I work as a psychotherapist as part of my work. And sometimes people want to have sessions with me on Skype. And it's different. It's really different than being in the room with somebody. So I agree with you that we have to keep an open mind to what these online relationships can do. And I don't really know that maybe they can do everything that real-time relationships can do. But I wonder, given my own experience.
You know, watching individuals in the video game community tell their stories over and over about how they might have struggled with a form of anxiety, particularly social anxieties, and how they've been able to find themselves in these really unique situations through video games of building relationships, have really helped them build their own confidence, have helped them explore other things in their lives that they possibly, or admittedly, self-admittedly, would have never explored. So I think maybe there is something to be said about your personality type, and that's bringing in a whole nother element where maybe you might do much better based on your personality or your working style to have a certain interface in this manner, but other folks might find it easier, and if not more productive and fulfilling, to have it, I don't want to say at a distance, but at a geographical, physical distance.
Absolutely. I mean, for some people, real interaction face-to-face can be overwhelming, but it can be toned down and offered in more manageable doses online. I'm sure of that, and I've talked to people who experience that. So definitely, I mean, I'm pretty clear that there are people for whom online interaction opens up worlds that they wouldn't otherwise be able to enter out of fear, out of other kinds of limitations. Mm-hmm. Also, people connect with other people who are so distant geographically, who might have rare conditions, you know, connecting with people in the same situation when nobody around you in your neighborhood is in your situation or has your particular need. So absolutely,
so
that's the case.
Would you kind of say, I mean, I feel this and I see it in the work that I do, that relationship building is not a one-size-fits-all. And as we're trying to, a royal we, really more you and your team, trying to figure out what that recipe for happiness might be, what that cocktail might be, really recognizing that, you know, happiness is a really unique experience to all of us.
Yeah. I mean, what we're hoping to study is kind of what works for whom, right? That we know that online interaction isn't going to go away, and it shouldn't go away, right? And we know that labeling real-time relationships as better or online relationships as better is so simplistic. And so what we're going to try to do is study, okay, what are the ways that people use online interactions that make them feel better, that make them feel more empowered? And what are the ways that send them down terrible rabbit holes? You know, I mean, we know that in different parts of the world, there are large chunks of people, often young men, who just stay home in their parents' homes, in their bedrooms, playing video games, and don't go out and engage with life. They don't study, they don't work, they don't see people. Now that's a minority, right? And that doesn't mean that video games are...
And in some respects, possibly a stereotype?
Well, no, they're pretty significant percentages. In Spain in particular, and in Spain they're called ninis, ni estudia, ni trabaja. They don't study and they don't work. And it's a whole social phenomenon. And in Japan they're called bedroom boys. But that doesn't mean that games cause that. That just means that there are certain types of people in certain cultures who interact with games in a way that constrict their lives, right? But most people don't.
Right.
So,
and if anything, for many, not just playing games, but the concept of building a community around playing games offers them job opportunities, ways to hone their skills for whether it be, apologize that Robin couldn't join us for this discussion because she's trapped in someplace more warm and, well, not more warm, but more beautiful possibly than DC out in the Pacific. But, as a game designer herself, she would be able to speak to this a little bit better than myself. But by playing games, you learn game mechanics. And it also helps you not only understand how to make them, but it also, I don't want to say reprograms you, but helps you develop a certain type of thinking that you might not develop in other ways. And they're also leading to careers for folks, not only making games, but playing competitively. Many of you have probably heard about esports and competitive gaming. It's not only a career for some folks, but for others, it's a wonderful opportunity to gain scholarships to go to university.
wow.
So yeah, it's a growing phenomenon and contributing to this multi-billion-dollar industry.
Yeah.
It's really cool.
Yeah. And I think one of the things that I think about, because I study development, right? I study like social emotional development, and we're all, as we grow up and as we go from kids to adolescence to young adulthood, we develop all these skills without even knowing it often. It's skills about how to have conversations, right? How much to disclose about ourselves. What do you do when you disagree with somebody? We had a panel on conflict resolution before lunch, and we all are engaged in conflict. How do you do that? So part of what I'm interested in is how do people get those skills, and what keeps them from getting the skills they're supposed to get as they go from being kids to teenagers to young adults. Can video games actually help people get those skills? Or can video games take some people and hide them away from life so they never get those skills with other people?
Well, are you seeing at all conflict resolution as a part of your study, and people who have the skill of conflict resolution are more happy?
Absolutely. Yeah, I mean, so we study marriages, and one of the things we find is that, early on, so because we've followed these people for 80 years and now we're following their kids, we get to ask them about their marriages and their close relationships when they're in their 20s and then their 40s and then their 60s. And what we find, and other studies do too, is that for young people, it's really important to learn how to manage conflicts. Like when you get together with a partner, romantic partner, but also friendships. You gotta learn how to deal with disagreements one way or another. And then older couples stop caring about that as much because they put it behind them.
I definitely think video games and online communities have the opportunity to help people hone that skill of conflict resolution.
So how do they do that?
I'm not really sure. From what you're seeing in your study, I'm not really sure it's much different than any other normal way. It's a learned behavior sometimes that's being modeled. You're watching other people. Video games and online, there's chat boxes and there's people dialoguing about having healthy competition, or people disagreeing about, on platforms like Twitch and YouTube, people are playing video games and people are watching them. So they're having conversations about, well, why did you do this? Why did you do that? So the player is having to negotiate, not only playing the game and strategizing themselves, but also with the community that's commenting about their performance or whatnot. And so I think that being exposed to someone that's good at that and having to I mean, I feel like it's like a musician, you know, I always am amazed. You see a musician get up in front of an audience and sings and plays a guitar at the same time, and I'm like, okay, well, we're lucky I can walk and chew gum at the same time.
Right.
So I feel like video games online, playing video games online, having to also then engage your community, I mean, that's a really big skill. So I think that people, in a very long-winded way, to what you're saying, I think people can learn to develop good conflict resolution skills by seeing them being modeled. And then also, because they have the opportunity to also participate, they become a part of the opportunity to resolve that conflict. Because sometimes those conversations aren't always positive. Sometimes they're not always the most positive conversations. And I think online, you watch people, the community really does oftentimes step in and take care of itself. And that's a great conflict resolution exercise that people can watch.
Right. So that's interesting to me. I mean, my stereotype was, well, if there's a conflict in a video game, you just take out a gun and shoot the person, and then it's over. But you're saying these are different video games, right?
It's a little aggressive.
A little aggressive. Yeah, sorry. But, you know, because I used to watch my sons play shoot-'em-up games, and they were pretty rudimentary compared to the games now. But the games are much more nuanced, subtle, varied. Right,
I don't think it really matters what you're playing. I mean, you know, even if you're playing Minecraft, I mean, there's an element of strategy, and regardless, again, of what you're playing, people are engaging with you while you're playing. And that's more from a streamer watching, you know, someone watching a streamer, but even if you're playing, you know, with friends in your living room, or you may be playing, you know, someone halfway around the world. I mean, that's the one thing we talk about, technology advancing and opening up opportunities for human engagement, hopefully leading to happiness, is that, you know, we can be sitting right here, plug in our game console, slap on a headset, and we are playing our friends halfway around the world, and having a conversation with them. I mean, some games, they're team-based. You know, you are having to have a conversation with other people and make a decision about your next move together. Like, it's not just one person controlling, you know, what's happening in the game. You literally have a headset on and you're talking each other through it.
So you're talking. You're not just typing.
No,
you're not
you are
keyboarding.
Physically talking to someone else
so
doing it.
That I think may be important, because then there's more room for emotional communication. One of the things I'm noticing, I don't know if you've ever noticed, like if you've had arguments with people, disagreements over email, that email's a terrible way to try to work stuff out if you're mad. Like, I'm working with a faculty group now that's doing this, and we keep saying, no, we have to get in the same room, because what I watch is that emails going back and forth drive people into more polarized positions, and that's a function of that mode of communication. And so that's why I asked, because it may be that getting to hear your teammates' voices, maybe getting to hear the other team's voices, would make a big difference in what it feels like.
Yeah. I mean, I think it goes back to the comment that I made earlier. You know, we all define happiness differently for ourselves. And based on our personality and other things, we might define what fulfills us in that manner very differently. So some people, it may be hearing. Other people, it may be written word. I think my personal opinion is that it's a very unique experience to everyone. And there might be other symptoms that are causing written communication to not always be, you know, as effective as it could be. But I don't think that I don't think it's something that, it's back to the one size fits all. Like, it's just, how do you choose to engage and what is fulfilling you, I think, is what's really important. And maybe when you think about the ingredients and what makes people happy, maybe it's more about communication skill sets. You know, how do you communicate, and exploring that a little bit. I mean,
You know, this takes us both a little far afield, but I wonder, can we talk a little bit about social media apart from, I mean, not apart from, because it's not completely separate from gaming, but because one of the things I'm coming to learn is that especially younger people, teenagers on social media, you know, we all post things, and then there's this whole thing about how many likes you get. Like, how many likes did you get in an hour, right? And for some people, this is just huge. And it makes them either start to feel good about themselves pretty quickly or feel terrible. Nobody liked my picture. And it also, what people talk about as FOMO, fear of missing out. You know, we post these pictures on Facebook, on Instagram, that make us all look like we're at parties all the time and on beaches. And even though we sort of rationally know that, we get the sense of, wait, everybody else is having this great life, and I'm just me every day. And so what I'm noticing, what I'm hearing from people and hearing younger people talk about, is the problem when they engage with social media of comparing themselves. And one of the things we know from good psychology experiments is that people who compare themselves more frequently to others, like literally a number of times during the day, are less happy than people who don't compare themselves to others as much. So I've been wondering about engaging in online communities where there's a lot of comparison going on. And I realize it's not completely relevant to the gaming world, but it is a really big, ubiquitous phenomenon, I think, right now.
Well, I mean, I can't really directly speak about social media. I mean, I guess the thing that I could say is video gaming is intensely social, and there are elements built into those online communities that might mimic some more what we might perceive as traditional social media functions, liking, sharing, things like that. So I'm sure some of the things that you're talking about probably exist within that community. But the best example or counterpoint I can kind of offer to that is, you know, last week is a great example. We had a game conference. Nearly 70,000 people, 70,000 video gamers descending on the city of Los Angeles. I think the city's probably still recovering. But it's fabulous, and all you see and feel is a lot of positive energy, and you talk to people, particularly streamers and people that are sort of engaged in more of that side of the community. That's actually a confidence builder for them. It's a healthy, sometimes a healthy competition. So I feel like as far as the video game community goes, I hear more positivity around that type of social media interaction and ability to interact like that as a positive thing for those individuals and also for the relationships and the communities that they're trying to build.
And when you hear about it being a confidence builder, like what do people say? What does it build their confidence in?
A wide range of things. I think it goes back to sometimes some social anxiety things, you know, fear of not wanting to do certain things, or thinking like they're the only person that feels this way, or they're the only person that has a really deep passion for something. So I think it shows them, wait, there are other people like me. And so maybe, I don't know what the technical term would be, but a little bit of a mirroring effect.
Yep.
And I think that that's really big. I mean, we want to, I think as human beings, even when you're really confident in your uniqueness, we still want to feel like we belong somewhere and that people understand us. Yeah. And I think that the video game community as a whole provides that for people, and they then ultimately share the same passion of a particular game, video games as a whole, or even a lot of these individuals have personalities, so then you're also bonding with the actual person and their personality. So right there, they're building a bond, they're building a relationship, they're happy, and the other person is happy, at least as far as I can see, and I can judge.
Yeah, you know, what you're pointing out is what we call in my world normalizing. Like when people realize, oh my gosh, other people have these feelings too, or other people are worried about this too. Yeah. That it's hugely relieving and helps and bonds people to each other and all of that. And if that can happen online and in games, that is great. And it's sort of the opposite experience from nobody else is like me. Nobody else wakes up in the morning feeling lousy and thinking they're doing the wrong things with their life and everybody hates me. I'm the only person who's ever felt that way. And so some people go that route and other people find ways to connect with other people and realize how much they have in common with other people. I think it would be wonderful to study how it is that people use maybe the same media in these completely different ways.
I mean, I think that whenever you get a group of people together, there's sometimes, you know, aspects that aren't always positive. But I think because these are really community-based interactions, whether it be, I don't feel like social media has lost a little bit of the element of community, because it's just a one-way conversation almost. You know, I just post stuff, you like it or you don't like it. Where the video game communities are largely actually two-way conversations that you're engaging in, and I think that might be one of the major differences to kind of look at, going back to the concept of communicating and happiness, building relationships, breaking down those barriers between virtual and in person. The video game community might offer really some interesting aspects in that about how you might be able to successfully break down those barriers and be able to see relationships are relationships no matter what the medium in which they're formed in.
Yeah. Okay, so I have another question.
Okay.
So one of the things that we find in our study is that we all need maybe even just one relationship or just a few relationships where you just feel like that person has your back. And no matter what, if you really needed something, that person would be there for you. So we used to ask a question repeatedly: who would you call in the middle of the night if you were really scared or sick? List everybody. And this was on a questionnaire. And some people could list like 3 or 4 or 5 people. Some people couldn't list anybody. And what we found is that the people who have at least one relationship like that are people who are healthier and as well as happier. And so what I've wondered is, I mean, and so that sort of, we were talking about real-time relationships, like who could you literally call and who might come over and help you. What happens, can those kinds of relationships form online?
I mean, I think absolutely. I slightly hesitate to answer that because I think it's a personal choice, going back to your pursuit of happiness and defining relationships for yourself. I mean, I think it's something that's very personal to every individual. And you know, some folks I see in the video game community, I mean, they develop really strong relationships. Some of them stay more in the online realm, but many of them extend outside of that. I mean, part of going to a conference, say like last week, is folks are, I mean, I spent probably the majority of the 5 days just getting pinged online, being like, hey, are you here? Like, let's meet up, let's grab coffee, let's do this. Are you going to this party? So it was a whole nother social aspect. And some of those people, I could pick up the phone, at least in last week's situation, be like, oh my God, FedEx, can you go to FedEx and pick up my stuff?
Yeah.
And them not judge me and me not have to, you know, rack up a big drink bill to pay them back for their awesomeness. So, I mean, I feel like they really can. And people just have to define it for themselves and know the boundary of the relationships they're building with people. Again, I feel like I've said this a couple times. I really just don't think that the medium in which you're building the relationship has anything to do with the quality of the relationship or your ability to reach out to that person or understand that person. I feel that it is, I just don't think the medium really has much to do with it.
Yeah. And that's what I don't think we know yet. I mean, that's where I would say we really need to learn about this more, because the media are sweeping us along, right? They are pulling us in and shaping us in various ways. Some of it is gaming, some of it's social media, some of it's just, you know, being news junkies and being on 3 screens at once looking at the news. But we know that they're grabbing our brains and doing things with them. And that's not necessarily bad. but that I think my wish is that we do more, that we study this more so we know kind of how it works well for people and for which people, and how things don't work well, and how our brains get programmed in ways we don't necessarily want them to. But I agree with you that I think, you know, we really have to be open to the idea that that relationships made online are different, but not necessarily of a poorer quality at all, and in some cases of a better quality. Make more things possible.
If you define a happy relationship as something that's contributing positively to your life and you feel good about it, a healthy relationship is a healthy relationship.
Yeah, yeah. The one thing you mentioned too, when you're talking about your friends at the conference and how
I'm
people
still recovering. I think I need some more sleep.
But people were pinging you saying, let's connect up, right?
Yeah.
So, you know, one of the things we're trying to understand is for which people do these online relationships make you start connecting with people in real time? And for which people do they make you hide in your bedroom, you know, for weeks on end and never see anybody? And we think that hiding in your bedroom is probably not a good thing if it keeps you away from other aspects of life, right? Which it obviously doesn't keep you away from, and many of the people you know and work with and hear from. And so that may be one of the kind of indicators, may be how much does our online engagement help us engage in the rest of life and get on with the things we want to get on with? And how much does it to start narrowing our world more and more?
I mean, I can't necessarily speak to that, but I think about it as anything in our lives. It's a tool for something.
Yeah.
It's a part of our life. It is not our life. It does not completely define us. It might define a part of us. It might help shape some of our happiness.
Right.
It might help shape some of our identity. But I don't think it's, you know, I don't think it's something that is so destructive in the opportunities that it can provide. Mm-hmm. And some of it is a little bit of self-awareness about how are you using this tool, how are you engaging with this tool, and what is it bringing into your life and what is it not. And that's the same assessment that many of us do for things that are not online based. Right. And having to kind of have that self-awareness and self-assessment about what we're using and engaging with.
Right, right. And what we know is that some people are going to be vulnerable to having life get worse when they engage too much and in weird ways with the online world. And just as some people are vulnerable to misusing alcohol and, you know, other substances, and some people are vulnerable to gambling addiction, even though most people can go to Las Vegas and have a good time and go home and still keep their houses and cars and things. So, you know, a lot of what we're talking about, I think, are individual differences among people in how they engage with these things, and that's part of what I'm interested in. Who are the people who need to be really careful? Could we define that even? Who, you know, just like we can begin to define who the people are who need to be really careful around alcoholism because they have a genetic vulnerability to that. There might be people, it's probably not genetic, but there may be people who, for various reasons, are vulnerable to getting lost in an unhealthy relationship in the online world, or getting lost in an unhealthy relationship to slot machines in Las Vegas, you know. Mm-hmm. And that's what I'm interested in studying more about.
I'll be interested in reading about it.
Yeah, well, it might be a long time.
Really quickly, actually, Josh, are we taking questions?
Yes,
or?
Okay,
Perfect.
You have a chance to finish up.
Okay. Awesome.
Oh, finish up. Yeah. Well, how should we finish up? I think we've done what I hoped we would do, which is raised a whole lot more questions than we've answered.
Yeah.
I don't know if that's been very satisfying for you guys, but.
I think the only thing I would say is that, you know, just 2 points kind of reinforcing them is I don't think, not that I'm a professional in any stretch of the imagination on this, but, you know, building relationships is not, you know, one size fits all. And I think any tool that we have that can improve us building relationships, we can solidly say building relationships is an element in happiness, that we should all, take advantage of them.
Yeah.
Well, let's give a big hand to Robert and Anastasia for having a great conversation. We have some time for questions from the audience. There are microphones placed on each side of the room. If you wouldn't mind, if you have a question, which I imagine many of you do, to please stand up behind the microphone and we'll call on you accordingly. And if you could just introduce yourself very quickly and then ask the question. Go ahead, sir.
Hi, I'm Daniel Braffman, and I'm a holistic health practitioner. And one of the things I'd like to sort of hear from both of you on is the paradox that seems to exist of video games both being a place of connectivity and of isolation at the same time.
Do you want to take that a little bit? Because you
I think
started to touch on it.
Right, because I think the paradox comes back to this one size doesn't fit all. I think it's the differences in the human beings who engage with the games, right? Because you're right, it does both. We know that at the extremes, it empowers some people's lives and opens new vistas, and for other people, it can destroy life. But most people are somewhere in the middle, and I think as we will be able to learn more about which people we need to help be careful with this thing. Because I think you're right, it looks like a paradox because you see both sets of reactions.
I think the only thing I would add is that it's a form of entertainment. There's also huge social benefits. There's huge educational opportunities that video games can be used. But like with so many forms of entertainment, we all have to kind of, I don't want to use the word police ourselves, but we have to sometimes establish limits so maybe we don't get into this such far bookend of kind of a yin and yang situation. But I'm not a doctor, and I don't want to purport to be one, so I think I'll kind of leave my comments there.
Thanks, Anastasia. Go ahead.
Hi, my name's Savannah. I'm interning at a data analytics intelligence consulting firm.
Ooh.
And sorry, I'm kind of tall. Being still a college student, we are seeing a lot more dependency on online social life, and I just think that's straight out the truth. And I'm going to try to not make this a loaded question. I'm actually coming off of what he had just said. There are people that I feel are vulnerable to instant gratification, finding happiness through social media, and I think you said it's a tool in our lives, but I think it's increasingly being something used more, used to be dependent for, I guess. So my question is, what are the dangers of having an online social life? In the past, it wasn't so transparent, and now people have the ability to see what everyone's doing. And as a college kid trying to work in government, I am scared for people being able to see everything online, you know what I mean? Versus my interpersonal relationships I'm not as worried about, versus me not having control over what people post on social media about myself, or, you know what I mean?
So are you thinking more about privacy than?
Kind of privacy, but also, the vulnerability that people have for having online dependency. Are there dangers to that?
And when you say online dependency, you mean they can't stop using it?
Yes. Not stop using that, but that's their way of finding happiness through instant gratification.
Well, I could talk as a shrink now. That's okay. So, the way we tend to think about it is the bottom line of somebody's life. Like, if are they able to, to love and to work? Are they able to have relationships that are satisfying and that they grow in, right? Especially if you're in college, you're doing so much growing socially, right? You're learning so much as you engage with different kinds of people, and are people able to do what they want to do? That might be studying, that might be working at a job, it might be, getting on with a career. And if they're able to do that, then, and their mood isn't being lowered and they're not getting depressed by social media, then I would say that's probably fine. So I guess the short answer is I would look to how their lives are going, right? And for people whose lives aren't going well, then those are the people who might need help with their social media use.
Thank you.
And I guess I would just tack on the kind of digital literacy aspect or privacy, kind of however you want to sort of, bucket that. A lot of this technology is new, and the advancements are coming out so quickly every day. And so I think that just like when you go to the grocery store, and you want to be an informed consumer, it's sometimes very difficult. So I'm not saying it's easy, but looking at it as you are a consumer of this product and looking into a little bit more about, what am I putting out there? What is accessible to folks, and trying to sort of discern that. And also I will say that back to the newness of all of this, one of the things that our foundation does with its grants program and some of our partnerships is we don't just limit this to video games. We actually do it across the full digital platform. Is we invest in programs that are helping teach kids digital literacy. Because I know when I went to school, like all of these tools didn't exist. So even as an adult, we probably should teach some adults too. As an adult, like we don't know because we didn't grow up with this. But kids are now growing up in it, and even still, we don't really have these really strong tools to teach them about digital literacy. So we're working to try to educate kids on digital literacy. And then when it comes to video games and consoles, we're trying to educate the parents about the controls that they can use. Like all the consoles have parental controls on them that can limit everything from the time that they're on them to the ability to access certain information, like buying things on your credit cards. So really being an educated consumer, I think, can go a really long way to creating a positive online presence, if you will.
Yeah.
Next question.
Hi, I'm Gabby. I'm a millennial. I spend a lot of time online. I also work at a software company. And I'm curious what the two of you both think about Gamergate.
About?
Gamergate, which was a controversy that happened a couple years ago involving the online gaming community, really kind of pushing back against what they saw as an increase in diversity and focus on social justice within video games and the press coverage of video games. And I think it was a really clear example of relationships that had been formed and the power of the gaming community. But it also kind of showed that that community had been very isolated and was kind of pushing back on anyone different. And so I guess my question about that is, kind of like you mentioned earlier, being online allows us to find people who are similar to ourselves that we may not have found elsewhere. But does it allow us to also filter out anyone who's different from ourselves and curate a network that is similar, to the detriment of diversity and learning about other points of view and kind of harboring these really toxic mindsets? And just kind of, your thoughts about how that impacts happiness, weighing those similarities versus diversity.
So I'll try to unpack that a little bit and simply, and I'm also being mindful of the time. That thing ticking at me, I just don't do it like that. I hear what you're saying. I think I might answer kind of in two parts. A little bit what we said earlier is that the line between online virtual relationships and in-person relationships, air quotes, those lines are blurring and they're breaking down. And at the end of the day, relationships are relationships, and how you treat people and how you engage with them, it doesn't matter where you're doing it. It can have the same positive and negative effect. I think you just see online having the opportunity to ramp some of this up a little bit more and maybe have a more quickly positive or negative, in that instance, effect because of the ability to amplify. So if that situation was created, say, in this room and we were all colleagues, it might spread quickly, but it would take much longer to have the ripple effect through all of us, where a video goes viral or a nasty comment or two goes viral, and it could take 1 minute or it could take 2 years online. Just depends on who picks it up and how fast. So, you know, I don't really think online versus offline really has anything to do with it. I just think it was the ability to quickly amplify it. And then, you know, we all weed people in and out of our lives, online or offline. Like, I hate to keep going back to it doesn't really matter, because the process that we go through is all the same. It's just on what scale and through what medium.
Can I, so this is where I will respectfully disagree. I think it does matter. I think there's more polarization because of online media, because we're getting so much of our information curated in these communities that you're talking about that get more and more segregated. So I'm actually worried about this a lot. And it's not just, it is a phenomenon of the, not just the online world, but the online world happens to be where it's playing out, where I live in a total bubble up there in Massachusetts, in liberal Massachusetts, right? And so people are talking about things like, we really need to, like, some people are talking about a national service where everybody at a certain age does things, not going to war, but does things for national service with other people who are from all over and all walks of life and very different, because we have no way anymore of really getting to know in real time people who are very different from us and pulling together for a common cause. The way, you know, World War II was a great leveler because everybody went, at least men did. So, you know, so I think there is something going on that's really concerning and scary, and that there may be some antidotes in real-time relationships and connections with people who come from very different places than we do. So anyway, I just want to say I get what you're saying, and I think it's really important.
We don't have that much time. I just want to make sure that we just ask the questions very quickly so we have enough time for at least the 3 other individuals who'd like to ask. Go ahead, sir.
Thank you. I created health and wellness games for Humana's Innovation Center, and one of the questions that I've had and have been thinking about quite a bit is, do you think game designers have a moral responsibility to help create games that are less polarizing?
Well, I mean, speaking of life, liberty, and happiness, personally, I'm a firm believer in the First Amendment and freedom of expression. So this is as much as, you know, developing video games as much as a science as it is an art. And I think that, you know, many people can choose to express themselves through their art how they choose, and it's up to us of, you know, how we choose to consume it as individuals.
And I'll offer another perspective.
That's what we're supposed to do.
Yeah. So my other perspective is that I think that yes, we should be able to express ourselves, but that we have ways of inflaming our worst natures or letting that inflammation calm down. And you can see this in the public discourse now, where people are mean to each other and they're petty and they call each other names, and it opens the floodgates of this kind of behavior. And I think that video games, just like any other entertainment, can do more of that to us and with us, or do less of it. And it doesn't mean I'm favoring censorship, but I think there is a kind of moral responsibility to say, you know, let's honor civility, let's honor peacemaking, let's honor those kinds of values and prioritize those over inflaming our worst natures. And because I think we're all getting a vivid example of how we can inflame our worst natures and what happens when we do.
This is a whole nother panel.
It's another panel. We got to stop.
Go ahead.
Hi, my name is Kimberly Richter. I work for C5 Accelerate here in DC. Thank you very much for your commentary about how relationships can serve as protective factors as we all approach happiness from a variety of different angles. I was wondering if you could speak a little bit more to what kind of personality traits or characteristics promote relationship building and how we as a society can cultivate them, whether through technology or not.
Well, I think, so how we can cultivate them quickly is sort of what Anastasia was getting to, which is we know that when kids have like socio-emotional learning, literally in schools, like these are what emotions are and this is how they work. And this is what happens when you get mad at somebody, and there are ways to solve things without fighting. And, you know, all that has shown dramatic results for kids. in giving them skills that they don't necessarily get otherwise. So, and I think that what we know from the research is that people who have more flexible ways of responding to challenges and stress do better. They do better at work, they do better in relationships, their health is better. And so that kind of flexibility is something you can develop. It's easier to develop as a kid than, so and I mean like, maybe when someone criticizes you, if the only thing you can do is say, no, it's not me, and blame someone else, that's an inflexible response, right? Whereas well, let me think about this, or, well, I did this, but, I couldn't help it because of the kind of nuanced, flexible responses to stressors and conflict are what help people. We think about it as emotional intelligence, and we know that people with more emotional intelligence fare better in every aspect of life as they go through life.
And last question, thank you.
Hi, I'm Imani. I'm a communications student at Temple University, and over the course of my freshman year, I kind of been thinking about this question, and a lot of my peers think yes, but do you think that social media, and I guess the gaming world can be included in this, but do you think that those exist as public spaces?
That they exist as public spaces,
do you consider them a public space?
Like in terms of your behavior, online is an extension of how you'd behave in a public park.
Oh. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it's a great question. Maybe it's an obvious, I've never thought of that before, but yes. And it's like, if you would behave the way you'd behave in a public park, you'd be decent and, you'd respect other people's boundaries. And yeah, I mean, that's my sense of it. But
I mean, I think if we're hearkening back a little bit to what we were talking about in terms of relationships and the kind of age-old commentary of, treat others how you want to be treated, whether people consider online a public space or not, I think it makes me feel a little bit like on my moral high horse. But you treat people how you would want to be treated, and I think that there is a lot of openness in social media that's a really great thing, and it sometimes opens people up to criticism or judgment. And so I think being cognizant that it might not always be a positive experience, and being kind to other people that might be having a negative experience, or to really just being a champion of good things and having positive dialogues and using it, for that, I think is something to just be cognizant of. So I don't want to say yes or no, but I mean, I think having the perspective that it's kind of a public space and you behave that way is probably a really positive thing for everybody.
Yeah.
Great. Well, thank you for your great questions. Let's give another round of applause to Robert and Anastasia for a great conversation. We're going to take a short break and reconvene here at 1:45 sharp in about 7 minutes for part 2 of Happiness with a focus on capitalism. So we look forward to seeing you all in a few minutes. Thank you very much.